You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we'll explore the critical concept of minimizing the blast radius of a cyber attack. Once again, we're joined by cybersecurity expert Dr. Mike Saylor. We'll talk about implementing least privilege access, network segmentation, controlling outbound traffic, and other ideas on how to reduce the impact of your next cyber attack. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that there were no backups of the really important database we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Before I continue, if I could ask you to press that subscribe, like, or follow button so that you will always get our amazing content. And I am W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And with me, I have my very expensive chair disassembly consultant, Prasanna Malayanti.
Boo.
Oh, Prasanna. Boo. Are you upset that I am returning my very expensive chair? Are you saddened?
I am not, because chairs are one of those things that are very subjective, and
Yeah.
what works for one person may not work for another person. So I get it.
So those that listen to the podcast regularly know that I recently purchased a pretty expensive office chair from Crandall Office Furniture, not a sponsor, and that is a very nice chair. It was actually a steel case chair, and I think I spent like $800 on it, which was a lot of money for me for a chair. And I did it all for Prasanna because
but
he was
if you think
complaining.
about
What?
Yeah. Well, two things. Yeah, your existing chair would constantly squeak, especially if you go left, right, left, right.
Like this?
Oh, I can't hear it anymore.
Well, maybe a better mic placement. I don't know.
The first is, the squeak. And then what was the second one? Oh, if you think about the cost per hour of buying that $800 chair and how much time you sit in that chair, it is
Yeah.
probably
And by
like
the
a
way,
penny a
it
day.
was a $1,200 chair that I got for $800. But anyway, Crandall was great in terms of, I'm like, listen, I just really don't like the chair. They were great with the return policy, so I'm very happy. But disassembling it was quite the chore. So on a completely different note, non sequitur, my favorite Latin term, we're going to be talking this week about minimizing the blast radius of a cyber attack. And once again, fans of the show will recognize our guest today, Mike Saylor. How's it going, Mike?
It's going well. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Doing all right.
I really wish Curtis would get a bit new chair, though.
I'm back to my old chair, which is for me is fine for now. But what do we mean, Mike, when we talk about minimizing the blast radius of an attack?
Sure. It's also today the new term is called exposure management.
Ooh, exposure management.
I like that.
I like it.
It is, and it's not a new term. It just means something different today than it used to. For me, it meant knowing who my daughter was going out with before they left the house. But today exposure management.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Today, exposure management really encompasses kind of the governance, like good controls and policy, and knowing where your stuff is. It involves good operations, sound operations, good quality, consistency. It involves incident response. It involves insurance and risk mitigation, and it's very broad. But specific to attack surface stuff, a lot of organizations, and I've been in IT for 30 years. I can count probably on one hand the number of organizations that have a good handle on their environment. Like how many, when I ask how many assets do you have? Oh, well, I need to
Yeah.
go check the spreadsheet, or let me run my scan real quick. They don't know. And that's a problem in certain industries, especially like oil and gas, where you got all that stuff out in the field and I have no idea. Well, then how can you protect what you don't know? And then there's other implications like licensing and patching and all. If you don't know what you're in charge of, then how can you be effective at it? So there's that. But then the exposure management, or the blast radius, is also all those controls that would be designed or implemented to minimize the impact of a given situation. Like, this laptop gets ransomware, how do I make sure it doesn't go other places, or at least not to the critical stuff? If users get infected, then they get the day off or whatever. But at least it's not taking down my server.
Right.
But then other considerations too, based on how your business operates and the people you work with. Are there ways to limit risk to that scope of your little ecosystem? If you're a company that just does business in Texas, then why are you accepting internet traffic from China?
Yeah, good point.
Kind of a simple example.
And one thing, Mike, as you were talking about sort of understanding like what's in your environment, I know sometimes we don't think about like companies who are developing software or even just using a third-party software. Sometimes those have vulnerabilities that get flagged. And if you don't know what software is running in your environment, how can you make sure that you don't have any issues, or you realize, hey, I should really be patching this, or I need to take some mitigation steps to prevent myself from being attacked and being exploited by a certain exploit?
Absolutely. And that seems like a very straightforward conversation to have. But the moment that we start sitting back and talking about changing our patch management policy and what systems get antivirus and what don't, and for whatever reason, it's not just us having this conversation anymore. We've got to involve the business and how what we're doing is going to impact people's ability to do their job or watch Netflix on their lunch break. But then also, is there a cost associated with that? Now we're going to be paying more or differently. And then at the end of the day, if our policy is what drives an incident, then you're on the hook. And so I think a lot of IT environments kind of take the risk averse approach. Let's like be as implement as much coverage as we can without
Hindering the
becoming
business.
responsible.
Yeah.
Or especially when the business doesn't give us the feedback or the direction we need to be more effective, we become the default scapegoat. I think the CrowdStrike situation where this update went out, I believe it was an involuntary update, so it doesn't really apply to patch management. But if we knew about the criticality of or the value or the function of a server or machine that had CrowdStrike on it, the moment that problem arose, we would know the impact it was going to have over the next day or week, and we would be able to mitigate that.
I was reading a blog this morning. I was reading a blog about the over-reliance on individual vendors, right? And the funny thing is, the blog was on CrowdStrike's blog. It was a blog that they wrote a little while ago about the over-reliance on a single vendor. It's just when you think about what happened with
Ironic.
it's just rather ironic. So when we talk about there are things. Let's first talk about this concept when we're trying to minimize that blast radius. One of the first things that comes to my mind is the concept of least privilege. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. That lends itself to some comments I've already made. Yeah. And so let's just take you gentlemen, for example, Curtis. If you're just a normal user, I'm just going to give you the ability to do your job. And so that's internet access, the ability to print, maybe access your email, and maybe access some role specific server or application within the environment. Well, that takes time on the operations side for me to develop who has access to what based on job role, which is called what? Role-based access.
Role-based access control, right? Or RBAC. Yeah.
Well, and so that's a mature version of just having the questions asked when new users get new user access is requested. And so in a small shop, that's not so much of a problem. But even in a small shop that has a lot of turnover, where you've got these large enterprise, small, medium, large, and then enterprise, the different sizes of organization may dictate the need for better, more mature approaches to allocating or provisioning access. So if we can reduce what a user has access to, we're reducing their exposure of that asset and that user. If they're compromised, their credentials are compromised, their assets compromised, whatever it is, that user profile, the limit of that user's profiles, that the access to do other stuff should mitigate the risk. And a good example of that is in some environments when IT resources are limited and we don't have the ability to go fix all these problems at people's desks. We're giving normal users, local administrator access to their machine.
Right.
And if we're not looking at stuff on the network like network shares and who has the ability to do whatever, the exposure there, the risk is much greater because you've given those users, those profiles, those assets more access than they need.
Well, I think when we start talking about least privilege and RBAC, where this really comes to play is the more privileges that you have as part of your job, the more RBAC and the concept of least privilege applies, right? So if you're, back in the day, again, you and I have been around a minute, and back in the day, if you were part of the IT team, you got root, right? You got root on all the systems and you could do all the things. And if you wanted to blow up Oracle, you logged in as root, you SU'd Oracle, you did stuff in Oracle, right? You basically were all powerful in the data center. And I guess what I'd like to recommend here is that the more power that you're giving to someone and the more powerful that their role is, the more you should think about this concept of limiting the privilege that they have, right? So you don't give root to everybody. You don't give the Oracle, like again, back in the day, you just gave the Oracle password to the person that was going to be in charge of Oracle rather than forcing them to become themselves and then SU to, and again, I'm using very Unix terms, but I'm old and that's what we did. Although
great
that's
power
still
comes great responsibility, right?
Yeah, exactly. Prasanna, you've dealt with this as well, right?
Oh yeah. No, and that's always the case. Is how do you make sure? Well, I think it's the trade-off, right? Because people want easy, seamless access to do things they have to get done. And they don't always do those operations over and over. So if you introduce some of these hurdles, it becomes difficult for them to do things. At the same time, I totally agree 100% that, hey, I can't do this anymore. Like, or I want to restrict access because it's just too much exposure. And so really only what you need access to, you should have. So an example is in the CrowdStrike case, right? If you look at what the recovery step was, right, you had to go to each individual machine, enter their recovery key before the user could even get to safe mode in order to be able to try to recover their machine. And this was, you had to go to every single endpoint and do that, right? If you said least privilege and you said, look, as an end user, you should never have access to this key, right? Because you never need access to it. Now you're kind of stuck having an IT person manually go to every single desk, and there's no sort of self-help mitigation, right? So I think that's why there needs to be a balance, right? It can't just be one or the other.
It's just like everything else in IT, right? It's easier to do it, like you said, it's easier to give everybody administrator on their laptop, right? It's easier to give everybody the recovery key. It's also riskier to do all of that. What were you going to say, Mike?
I'll add a couple things. You're right. It is a balance. The more security you have, the less usable things are. And that's just a age-old balancing act between operations or usability and security. But a couple things I'll add, and this kind of continues the threads that both of you mentioned. even administrators should have a normal non-administrator account for
Yeah.
doing normal non-administrator things like checking my email and writing reports or whatever. I don't need to be logged in as admin for that. And it could still be Mike admin, but also have a Mike normal user account. We want that accountability that I can attribute network activity to a user.
Yeah. Can,
And
can
that
I
way
add,
it's
can I
all
add on that? Can I add on that, Mike?
sure.
And you should, as a matter of policy and a matter of logging and monitoring and enforcement, enforce the idea that you do not ever log in as administrator or log in as root. You log in as you, and you become the role that you need. That creates logs. That creates all of these things. And that way, if anyone ever does log in as administrator directly, that should be setting off the klaxon alerts everywhere, right?
Absolutely. So that goes back to the logging and alerting part. And you're right, that's policy. So you need to have a policy that dictates that privileged users have normal user accounts and that they use those accounts to then gain administrator, whether it's their own administrator account or it's sudo or su to a root or admin account. The other thing I'll contribute is privileged access is often applied to more than just users. There are service accounts that get privilege. And so you've really got to assess whether service accounts really need that privilege. And I know a lot of vendors and IT shops will give it that privilege for the ease of deployment and troubleshooting. Like it's not going to be a problem if it's an admin. Unfortunately, even security tools, and I think we may have mentioned red teaming at some point. When we red team an organization, we look at service accounts, and in a lot of cases, those security tools that are supposed to protect you are also running as a privileged service account. And in a lot of cases, we're able to actually compromise those security service accounts in order to compromise the network.
Yeah, we
So there's a lot
talked
of things to
about that.
consider.
We talked about those service accounts quite a bit a couple episodes ago.
But that's going to be policy. Policy needs to
Yes.
dictate that least privilege is something that needs to be applied to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to another topic. Least privilege, really important. Implement it wherever you can, as much as you can. There is a balance that you have to have, right? And I do think that idea of like, administrators need to have administrator, but they should not be logging in as administrator. They should have to become administrator. And I do very much prefer sudo to su because you use your password, right, rather than the root password. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about network segmentation. You talked a little bit about laptops. One of the things, a laptop, we can limit to a certain degree what servers a laptop has access to, but I think that in almost every case, we can put laptops on a separate network that should never be able to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Why does a laptop ever need to talk to another laptop directly?
Well, it's because it's running Windows, first of all. But their Windows is so chatty when you look at network analyzers. It's crazy.
Right.
But absolutely, you should have a like your core network should be on its own segment. Mm-hmm. If you have a voice over IP network, that needs to be on its own segment. Your backup network, your administration. There are so many different ways to architect your network that can reduce exposure when there is a problem. Because deploying access control, creating rules around segments, all that stuff is one console today with the virtual, the interface and a lot of these switches. It's so intuitive, creating VLANs and all that stuff. That is one of the best and most timely ways of mitigating network layer intrusions and incidents is being able to, you've already got it set up. If there's a problem with the user environment, just go to your switch and tell it can't talk to anything else for a while until you figure this out. So there's a lot of very effective and timely things you can do once you've architected segmentation. The tools are out there.
And Mike, I think, and want to get your take on this. I guess so. segmentation is great and firewall rules are great only if you use them correctly. Right? Because there are a lot of times where people might say have a trunk port passing all the VLAN tags across it, which basically defeats the purpose of having segmentation, especially for end users, because you can automatically switch between different VLANs. Now you have access to networks which you should not. So just making sure you are using the switches and the network configuration and also your firewall rules correctly is also a big thing as well.
Yeah, you've got to have a strategy for your architecture. Implementing parts of this are better than not in most cases, but implementing segmentation can actually create more overhead
Yeah.
if you don't do it right. And then, I mean, I listed a couple. You could also create a segment for your remote access users that are calling in over, VPN or what have you. But the idea, though, and even other locations, if you've got different buildings, that those buildings should be on their own segment. If you're running like an MPLS or internal networking scheme for that.
And
But the idea then is making sure you have a good understanding of how your network operates and how it supports the business so that you can configure that right.
on a previous episode, actually, I think it's the one that went live just this week. Uh, in recording world, it's it's different. It's different on the episode world, but one of the things that I harp against a lot is RDP, right? Which I call the ransomware deployment protocol. Um, and if you're going to enable RDP, I think RDP should be on its own segment. That in order to use RDP, you must be either physically present in a particular place or you need to be VPNing in to that you should not have RDP on every server and have those RDP ports accessible everywhere, right? That's another. Can you think of anything else like that we would really want to segment off?
MDNS.
So, man, I can probably spend the rest of the day talking scenarios. But the important thing to do is assess the way your environment operates, the things that you use to support your environment, your users, and the company, and then what I'm going to say what risks are associated with that. Like RDP, if you don't have it configured well, all that traffic is unencrypted.
Yeah.
If so are there other tools you're using, and how are those configured, like Service Desk or Ninja RMM or some of these others? If those are great tools, but if the endpoints are configured to auto answer without user interaction and put in a token and all that stuff, that's a risk. And that's an example of, look at the tools you're using and can we use them securely? If not, is there an alternative? And like, there are alternatives to RDP that are low or no cost, that are more secure and effective. They're just they're not easy. They don't come with the operating system. So there's a list of deployment and configuration to use it, that maybe some organizations don't have the time or resources to identify.
Or once again, money. It's like everything else. The good tools cost money, right?
Yeah.
Um,
The one other thing I was going to add to what you were saying, Mike, is for some of these vendors, maybe it's worthwhile to see, do they have like white papers or knowledge base articles on how to actually set these up securely, right? Or best practices to secure.
And I know, and you're right, there usually is, because that's just going to help them, distribute and market their product. I know a lot of organizations that are using AI to ask those questions, like what's a good alternative to RDP or what have you. And I'm gonna suggest that people be conscious that when you ask those questions in a public domain, they become public knowledge. And if I can trace that back to who asked the question, now I know the technologies you might be using. But also not to trust AI on face value. Still do your own research and fact finding and all that good stuff.
Are you saying AI is not perfect?
It is not perfect. AI is almost intelligent.
Almost intelligent. I like that. The key is the word artificial. That I saw a meme yesterday, and it was a picture of what's the guy, the young man that comes back in time to stop the Terminator. What's his name? What's the character's name?
T-2000.
No, the guy that comes back, the son,
Oh,
the guy that battles all the Terminators.
Why
Come
can't I
on,
think of him? Yeah, we know who you're talking about, though.
Mike Connors. Mike Connors. Isn't that his name, Mike Connors?
yeah.
Anyway, and he's like it's a picture of him like giving side eye, and it's like Mike Connors watching all of you people befriend AI.
Nice.
All right, so let's talk about a third topic, and that is, again, this is all under the concept of minimizing blast radius. One of the things, so we talk on this podcast, we talk a lot about backup and recovery and DR and making sure that you have a copy of your data and having it in a place that is blocked from access, so that if you do get attacked or when you get attacked, the hackers won't be able to also delete your backups. Having said that, none of that will help you if your data is stolen, right? If your data is exfiltrated. So the thing that I think people are not spending enough time on is doing what they can to stop the uploading of their data, to the world. And there's a really good episode of ours back when we had Dwayne from the Red Teaming group that where he talked a lot about, he talked about how that actually generally the hackers aren't using like the web. They're just going directly. They're just, copying the data directly to where they want to store it because, and this is the crazy thing, no one is stopping them, right? They know that the web traffic is being monitored, and so they don't use that. And he had this analogy. He goes, it's like we're in this wide open field, and the web is like a door in the middle of this field, and that door is locked. So it's like, oh darn, there's a door here. We can't use it. Oh, maybe we'll just go around the door, right? Well, all these other ways. So it came as a surprise to me, and I guess it shouldn't, because historically we didn't limit outgoing traffic. And so, what do you think about this idea of basically blocking everything that's going out and only limiting what should be going out, which is the complete opposite of the way most networks currently are configured? What do you think about that idea?
I think it's a beautiful idea, but it would take a lot of analysis that most organizations don't go through. So what is normal? What is allowed? Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? How much volume should I be considering as normal? What ports does that data go out? What protocol? All those things.
Yeah. He talked
It can
about
be done.
turning on your firewalls on observe mode first for like a month, just to see what actual outgoing traffic. And he did tell the story that when they were advising a customer of this and they turned on their firewall in observe mode, they found out they were in the middle of an actual attack during
Yep.
the observe mode. But yeah, that you definitely have to. You can do a lot of damage, and and I have a story that I've told a lot of times on the podcast of me working in an environment where they blocked everything, and the amount of hassle that was to me so here I was they had a very segmented network that server A could not talk to server B. It was properly done, and this is 25 years ago, so this is really impressive. But when me, the crazy man, came in and I wanted to do this thing called backups, and I needed a server to be able to talk to every other server, that blew their mind, and they hated me from day one, and they did a lot of damage to my ability to do my job in the process. So, IT has to get their job done, but I do think this is something that you should entertain. And I do like this idea of turning on the firewall and observe mode. What do you think, Prasanna?
I think that's worthwhile. I think also with sort of some of the blacklists that are out there, for instance, you could also be using DNS blacklists and other things like that to also help filter out some of the common
Yes.
websites or IP addresses which have a bad reputation, right? There's also the reputation score out there, right? So you can look at some of these and apply them. And not necessarily going to prevent anyone from trying to get to legitimate websites, because even in those 30 days when you're running firewall and observe mode, maybe it's seasonality and I don't go look at certain websites or do certain things until like the quarter end. So you're not impacting the business, but at least you're trying to prevent a lot of the malicious traffic.
He did also talk about blocking things like SSH, SCP. He's like, ask yourself, when would we ever? Is there a scenario in which we, as admins, would ever need to SSH to the outside of our network? And if the answer is we can't think of one, then turn SSH off
Or
and similar
FTP.
or FTP, similar protocols, right? Outgoing, specifically outgoing FTP, right? Um, can you think of other things like that, Mike, that we might want to block going out?
Encrypted traffic over your DNS port.
That did come up, I think. Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's a good exfil. That's a good exfil port and tactic. But then
You
I
want to
think
explain that? I know what you mean, Mike, but do you want to explain that?
so. It's a port that's usually not monitored.
Right.
It's never blocked. You have to have it. So we don't monitor the DNS port on the firewall, and bad guys know this. So we're to your point about web traffic and encrypted traffic and these other services like SSH and FTP. Those run on specific ports, and so if I'm concerned about someone creating a connection outbound that can upload files, I'm looking at port 21 and the SSH port, but very rarely do we monitor the DNS port. And so and there's a couple things there. One, very low traffic on that port, and so we could simply look for any increase, abnormal traffic volume on that port. That should be clue number one. And then clue number two, bad guys, when we exfil data off through that port, we typically encrypt it, so you don't know what we're stealing. And so encrypted traffic over that port at any level should be suspicious. So yeah, and this goes back to understanding your business. Whether it's the firewall, observe mode, or just simple understanding of the different applications and ways that users interact and data flow and all that stuff, that'll help you determine what can be turned off, blocked, uninstalled, monitored, that kind of thing. And along those lines, and Persona touched on this with the known bad IP lists. So those are good, but you might have a handful of bad IPs in a geographic area of the world. Well, if your business doesn't if your business doesn't care about traffic from that part of the world, just block that entire geo-IP subnet, and that'll do two things. One, or several things. One, you're not going to get direct traffic from that part of the world you don't care about, whether it's malicious or unintentional, and that should reduce overhead on your firewall, but it'll also limit at least the direct attack exposure from that part of the world.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago me deciding that I didn't need any web browsers from customers from Russia. I remember deciding that a long time ago. Yeah, this reminds me. I'm going to draw an analogy to pre 9/11, right? The idea of the idea that the attackers used the planes as the weapons themselves was a new idea at the time. This is a new idea that we never really had to think about exfiltration really as the problem itself. And so I'm just saying, to me, it's the one problem that you can't stop, right? I'm not, let me rephrase that. If you experience it, if they download your data, there's nothing you can do. You're going to either pay the ransom or take the hit, the PR hit of whatever it is that's going to happen to your company. And which is why I remember asking you, the degree of people that, or the percentage of people that pay the ransom. And one of the first things you said was, if they did exfiltration, generally speaking, they're going to end up paying the ransom. And so I guess all I'm saying is, it's time to have that conversation. Maybe you do some of these things. Maybe you block known bad IP addresses. Maybe you start blocking, outgoing SSH and SCP and FTP, any of the file transfer type protocols. And maybe you at least consider, run your firewall on observe mode to see what kind of outgoing traffic that you normally have. And then maybe if you want to take it to the next level, do the best thing. Again, good, better, best, right? The best thing would be to block all outgoing traffic except for the stuff. But yes, your initial response to that is 100% true. It's going to take you a minute to accomplish that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and just imagine the end users
in the process. What's that?
Yeah, and just imagine the end users. Like, Curtis, imagine if at home you blocked all outgoing traffic.
Yeah.
Right? Well, imagine
what of the help desk are going to increase.
Yes.
Exactly. I can imagine that very much. Well, it's been another great conversation. I hope that folks got some ideas about ways that they can minimize the blast radius. And this is part of our continuing series here about defeating ransomware. Thanks again, Mike.
You're welcome anytime.
And thanks again, Prasanna.
No, this was fun. And Mike, I'm glad that there's someone who understands networking, because whenever I talk about networking with Curtis, it's sort of just like
stop. You're
but
mean.
I love you, Curtis.
Sometimes you're mean, Prasanna. Thank goodness for me, I have our lovely listeners. We love you guys. Thanks for being there. At least I think you're there. The numbers say you're there. So thanks for being there. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.